The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Captain James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial sword and prepared for another routine day as head of the Royal Guard. He had served the monarchy for 15 years, witnessing countless state dinners, royal weddings, and diplomatic meetings. Nothing could have prepared him for what he would discover on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday in October. Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, had always been a figure of controversy in the British press. Her relationship with King Charles had weathered decades of scrutiny, from their secret affair during his marriage to Princess Diana to their eventual wedding in 2005. The public had slowly warmed to her, appreciating her dedication to charitable causes and her unwavering support of the king. But beneath the surface of royal protocol and public appearances, a secret lay buried that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Captain Morrison's day began like any other. He conducted the morning briefing with his team, reviewed security protocols, and inspected the grounds. The Queen Consort was scheduled to attend a charity luncheon in London, followed by a private meeting with genealogy researchers at Buckingham Palace. It was this meeting that would change everything. Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned geneticist and royal historian, had been working on a comprehensive family tree project for the Royal Archives. The project aimed to document and verify the bloodlines of various noble families connected to the British crown. What started as academic research had evolved into something far more significant when Dr. Chen discovered inconsistencies in historical records. 3 months earlier, Dr. Chen had requested permission to conduct DNA analysis on various artifacts and personal items belonging to members of the extended royal family. The request was routine, part of preserving historical accuracy. Among the items was a locket belonging to Camilla's great-grandmother, Sonia Keppel, who had been the mistress of King Edward VII in the early 1900s. The initial results had been startling. Dr. Chen found genetic markers that suggested a direct bloodline connection between Camilla and the royal family, but not through the expected Keppel lineage. The DNA indicated a much closer relationship than anyone had previously suspected. Confused by the results, Dr. Chen had run additional tests using hair samples from a brush that had belonged to Camilla's mother, Rosalind Shand. Captain Morrison was reviewing the guest list for the afternoon meeting when his secure phone buzzed. It was Dr. Chen, her voice trembling with urgency. She needed to speak with him immediately about a matter of national importance. The captain had worked with Dr. Chen on several historical verification projects before, and had never heard such distress in her voice. 20 minutes later, Dr. Chen sat across from Captain Morrison in his private office, clutching a manila folder that seemed to weigh more than the crown jewels themselves. Her hands shook as she opened the file, revealing charts, graphs, and laboratory reports that would rewrite British history. The DNA analysis had revealed something impossible, yet undeniable. Camilla Parker Bowles was not the daughter of Major Bruce Shand and Rosalind Cubitt, as recorded on her birth certificate. The genetic evidence pointed to a different father entirely, one whose identity would send shockwaves through the establishment. The tests indicated that Camilla was the biological daughter of King George VI, making her the half-sister of Queen Elizabeth II. Dr. Chen explained how she had triple-checked the results, even bringing in independent laboratories to verify her findings. The evidence was overwhelming. In 1947, the same year Princess Elizabeth married Prince Philip, Rosalind Cubitt had been working as a lady-in-waiting at Buckingham Palace. Historical records showed she had access to the royal family during a period when King George VI was struggling with his health and the pressures of post-war Britain. The implications were staggering. If the DNA results were accurate, it meant that Camilla had unknowingly married her own nephew. King Charles III was the son of Queen Elizabeth II, who would be Camilla's half-sister according to the genetic evidence. The revelation threatened not only personal relationships, but the legitimacy of the current royal line. Captain Morrison felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. As head of the Royal Guard, he was sworn to protect the monarchy from all threats, both physical and reputational. This information, if made public, could destroy the institution he had dedicated his life to serving. Yet as a man of integrity, he also understood the importance of truth. Dr. Chen continued explaining her findings, showing how the genetic markers aligned perfectly with known royal DNA samples from previous historical investigations. She had even found circumstantial evidence in old court records and personal diaries that suggested a romantic relationship between King George V and Rosalind Cubitt during the late 1940s. The captain's mind raced through the potential consequences. The British press would have a field day with such a revelation. Anti-monarchist groups would use it as ammunition to question the entire system of hereditary rule. Other countries within the Commonwealth might reconsider their relationship with the British Crown. The scandal could trigger a constitutional crisis unlike anything seen in modern British history. But perhaps most devastating would be the personal impact on the royal family themselves. Queen Camilla would discover that her entire life had been built on a lie. King Charles would learn that his wife was actually his aunt, and their marriage would be called into question. The emotional trauma could tear the family apart, just as they had finally found stability after years of turbulence. As Dr. Chen finished presenting her evidence, Captain Morrison realized he faced the most difficult decision of his career. He could suppress the information, protecting the monarchy but living with the knowledge of this monumental secret. Alternatively, he could inform the royal family, giving them the chance to address the situation before it potentially leaked through other channels. The afternoon was growing late, and Queen Camilla would arrive for her meeting with Dr. Chen within the hour. The captain knew that once she walked through those doors, there would be no turning back. The secret that had remained buried for over 70 years was about to surface, and the British monarchy would never be the same again. Queen Camilla's Rolls-Royce pulled through the gates of Buckingham Palace at exactly 3 o'clock. She had spent the morning at a children's hospital in East London, reading stories to young patients and bringing smiles to their faces. The charity work always energized her, reminding her why she had embraced her royal duties despite the initial public resistance to her marriage to Charles. As she walked through the palace corridors, Camilla felt a sense of contentment about her life. At 76, she had finally found her place within the royal family. The British people had come to accept her, and even embrace her warmth and genuine care for others. Her relationship with Charles had grown stronger over the years, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. Captain Morrison intercepted her before she reached the meeting room where Dr. Chen waited. His usually composed demeanor seemed strained, and Camilla noticed the tension in his shoulders. She had worked with the captain on numerous security matters and had never seen him appear so unsettled. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I need to speak with you privately before your meeting with Dr. Chen. It concerns the genealogy research project." Camilla sensed something serious in his tone. "Of course, Captain. Is there a security concern I should know about?" They entered a small sitting room adjacent to the main meeting area. Captain Morrison closed the door carefully and activated a device that would ensure their conversation remained private. The precaution was unusual for a routine genealogy discussion, and Camilla felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "Your Majesty, Dr. Chen has made a discovery during her research that has significant implications for the royal family," Morrison began. "The DNA analysis has revealed information about your parentage that contradicts official records." Camilla's hand instinctively moved to the pearl necklace at her throat, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. "What kind of information, Captain?" Morrison took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything for the woman sitting before him. "The genetic testing indicates that Major Bruce Shand was not your biological father. The DNA evidence points to a different paternal lineage entirely." The color drained from Camilla's face. She had always been proud of her family heritage, particularly her father's military service and her connection to the Shand family name. The thought that this foundation of her identity might be false was deeply unsettling. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How is that possible? Are you suggesting my mother had an affair?" Morrison nodded gravely. "The evidence suggests that your biological father was someone your mother knew during her time working at the palace in the late 1940s, someone very close to the royal family." Camilla's mind began racing through the implications. Her mother, Rosalind, had worked as a lady-in-waiting during the early years of Queen Elizabeth's marriage. She had often spoken fondly of her time at the palace, describing it as some of the happiest months of her life. But she had never mentioned any romantic relationships during that period. Who? Camilla asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Captain Morrison met her eyes directly. According to the DNA analysis, your biological father was King George VI. This would make you the half-sister of Queen Elizabeth II, and... He paused, the weight of the revelation heavy in the air. The aunt of King Charles III. The room seemed to spin around Camilla. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about herself and her family. The man she had married, the love of her life, would be her nephew if this were true. That's impossible, she said, her voice barely audible. There must be some mistake in the testing. These things aren't always accurate, are they? Morrison wished he could offer her that comfort, but his duty required honesty. Dr. Chen has verified the results through multiple independent laboratories. The genetic markers are conclusive. She's prepared to show you all the evidence. Camilla stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the palace gardens, the same gardens where she had walked countless times with Charles, discussing their future together and their hopes for modernizing the monarchy. Now those memories felt tainted by this revelation. Does anyone else know? She asked, her back still turned to Morrison. Only Dr. Chen, myself, and now you, Your Majesty. Dr. Chen has maintained strict confidentiality throughout her research. Camilla turned back to face him, her royal training helping her maintain composure despite the emotional turmoil she felt inside. What does this mean for my marriage? For Charles? For the monarchy itself? Morrison had been asking himself the same question since learning the truth. That depends on how this information is handled. If it becomes public knowledge, it could create a constitutional crisis. The legitimacy of royal marriages and the line of succession could be called into question. But surely the marriage would be considered valid, Camilla said, grasping for some stability in the chaos. We didn't know about any blood relationship when we married. It was done in good faith. From a legal standpoint, that's likely correct, Morrison agreed. But the court of public opinion might be less forgiving. The press would have a field day, and it could damage the monarchy's reputation irreparably. Camilla sank back into her chair, the full weight of the situation settling upon her. She thought about Charles, probably reviewing state papers in his study at this very moment, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. She thought about her stepchildren, William and Harry, and how this news might affect their view of her and their father's marriage. What do you recommend, Captain? She asked, recognizing that Morrison's experience and loyalty to the crown made him the best person to advise her in this unprecedented situation. Morrison had been considering this question since Dr. Chen first showed him the evidence. We have several options, Your Majesty. We could suppress the information entirely, ensuring it never sees the light of day. We could inform King Charles privately and let the royal family decide how to proceed. Or we could prepare a carefully managed disclosure that controls the narrative. Each option came with significant risks and consequences. Suppressing the information would require the silence of everyone involved, but secrets of this magnitude rarely stayed buried forever. Informing Charles would share the burden but also potentially devastate him personally. A managed disclosure might protect the monarchy's interests but would still unleash a media storm of unprecedented proportions. I need to see the evidence myself, Camilla decided. If this is really true, I have a right to know everything. Morrison nodded. Dr. Chen is prepared to walk you through all of her findings. But Your Majesty, once you see the full scope of the evidence, there may be no going back to the way things were before. Camilla straightened her shoulders, drawing on the strength that had carried her through decades of public scrutiny and personal challenges. Captain, I've spent my entire adult life dealing with situations where there was no going back. This may be the most difficult one yet, but I won't run from the truth, whatever it might be. As they prepared to join Dr. Chen in the meeting room, Camilla felt as though she was walking toward a precipice. Her life, her marriage, and her role in the monarchy were all about to be examined through the lens of this shocking revelation. The woman who had fought so hard to find acceptance and respect as queen consort now faced the possibility that her very identity was built on a 70-year-old lie. Dr. Chen rose respectfully as Queen Camilla entered the meeting room, her research materials spread across the mahogany table like pieces of a puzzle that would reshape British history. The geneticist had spent sleepless nights preparing for this moment, knowing that her scientific discovery would cause immeasurable personal pain to the woman now standing before her. "Dr. Chen," Camilla said, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil she felt, "Captain Morrison has explained the general nature of your findings. I would like to see the evidence for myself." The scientist nodded, gesturing for the Queen Consort to take a seat. "Your Majesty, I want you to know that I have approached this research with the utmost care and respect. The last thing I intended was to uncover information that might cause distress to your family." Camilla appreciated the sentiment but needed facts, not sympathy. "Please show me what you found." Dr. Chen opened the first folder, revealing a complex family tree that had been painstakingly reconstructed through genetic analysis. "We began with standard genealogical research, using DNA samples from various artifacts associated with royal family members throughout history. Your great-grandmother Sonia Keppel's locket provided our first sample." She pointed to a section of the chart showing the Keppel family lineage. "Initially, we expected to find genetic markers confirming the traditional family connections. However, the DNA told a different story." Dr. Chen pulled out a series of laboratory reports, each bearing the official seals of different genetic testing facilities. "These are results from 4 separate laboratories, all confirming the same findings. The genetic material associated with your family line shows markers that are inconsistent with Major Bruce Shand being your biological father." Camilla leaned forward, studying the scientific data that seemed so cold and clinical yet held such emotional weight. "What exactly do these markers tell you?" "DNA analysis can identify specific genetic sequences that are passed down through paternal and maternal lines," Dr. Chen explained. "When we compared your genetic profile with known samples from the Shand family, we found significant discrepancies. However, when we cross-referenced with royal family DNA samples that we had on file from previous historical research projects, we found clear matches." The scientist opened another folder, revealing photographs of historical documents and personal letters. "I also conducted research into your mother's activities during the late 1940s. Palace. Records show that Rosalind Cubitt worked closely with the royal family during a particularly challenging period in King George VI's reign." Camilla recognized some of the photographs from her mother's personal collection, images she had seen countless times throughout her childhood. Her mother standing beside young Princess Elizabeth, attending formal dinners, participating in state functions. What had seemed like cherished memories of royal service now took on a different meaning. "The historical record shows that your mother spent considerable time at the palace during 1946 and 1947, Dr. Chen continued. "This was a period when King George VI was dealing with significant health issues and the stress of post-war reconstruction. Contemporary accounts describe him as isolated and struggling with his responsibilities." Dr. Chen produced a series of diary entries that had been preserved in the royal archives. These are excerpts from various courtiers' diaries from that period. Several mention the king's fondness for your mother and their frequent private conversations. At the time, these were interpreted as innocent professional interactions. Camilla read through the diary entries, seeing her mother's name mentioned repeatedly in context that suggested a closer relationship than she had ever imagined. One entry, dated March 1947, described King George VI and Rosalind Cubitt walking together in the palace gardens, deep in conversation that seemed to provide His Majesty with much-needed comfort during these trying times. "Your birth certificate lists your birth date as July 17, 1947, Dr. Chen noted. Working backward, your conception would have occurred in October 1946, precisely during the period when your mother was working most closely with King George VI, and the timing was damning. But Camilla tried to maintain objectivity. Couldn't there be other explanations? Other men your mother might have encountered during that period?" Dr. Chen had anticipated this question. "I conducted extensive research into your mother's social circle during 1946 and 1947. Palace records show her schedule was almost entirely consumed by royal duties. She had very little time for outside social engagements, and no documented romantic relationships during that period, aside from her eventual marriage to Major Shand in 1949. The scientist pulled out the final piece of evidence, a genetic comparison chart that showed DNA matches between Camilla and known samples from Queen Elizabeth II's family line. "This is perhaps the most conclusive evidence. The genetic markers indicate that you share a father with Queen Elizabeth II, making you half-sisters. Camilla stared at the chart, seeing her own genetic code aligned with that of the woman she had known as her sister-in-law for decades. The scientific proof was overwhelming, yet her heart rebelled against accepting it. "What about my resemblance to Major Shand?" she asked, grasping for any detail that might contradict the evidence. "People always said I looked like him." "Physical resemblance can be deceiving," Dr. Chen replied gently. "Many genetic traits are influenced by maternal genes and environmental factors. Additionally, people often see what they expect to see, especially within family relationships." Captain Morrison, who had been quietly observing the presentation, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Dr. Chen has also uncovered some personal correspondence between your mother and King George VI that was preserved in the private royal collection." Dr. Chen hesitated before opening the final folder. "These letters are quite personal in nature. They suggest a relationship that went beyond professional duties." The letters, written in King George VI's distinctive handwriting, were addressed to "My dearest Rose," Rosalind's family nickname. The content was carefully worded but clearly affectionate, expressing gratitude for the light you bring to these dark days and the comfort of your presence when the weight of the crown feels unbearable. One letter, dated November 1946, was particularly revealing. "Rose, our time together has become the brightest part of my days. I know the complexities of our situation, but I cannot help but treasure these moments of happiness you have given me. Whatever the future holds, please know that you have touched my heart in ways I never thought possible." Camilla felt tears welling up as she read her mother's name written in the hand of the king, who had been Charles's grandfather. The letters painted a picture of a lonely monarch finding solace with a kind and understanding woman during one of the most challenging periods of his reign. "There's one more thing," Dr. Chen said quietly. "I found evidence that your mother may have suspected the truth. Among her personal effects that were donated to the royal archives after her death, I discovered a sealed envelope marked for Camilla when the time is right. Your brother Mark apparently never found it, as it was mixed in with other historical documents. Captain Morrison had retrieved the envelope, which bore Rosalind Cubitt's wax seal. It sat unopened on the table, containing what might be the final confirmation of the truth they had uncovered through scientific means." Camilla looked at the envelope bearing her name in her mother's familiar handwriting. Inside might be the explanation she had been seeking, or perhaps an apology for a secret that had been carried to the grave. The envelope represented the final piece of a puzzle that had already fundamentally changed her understanding of her own identity and her place within the royal family. The room fell silent as three people contemplated the magnitude of what had been revealed. The scientific evidence was conclusive, the historical record was compelling, and now the possibility of a personal confession from Rosalind herself lay before them. Whatever that envelope contained would either confirm their worst fears or provide some context that might make the truth more bearable. Queen Camilla's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope bearing her mother's wax seal. The weight of the paper seemed disproportionate to its size, carrying as it did the potential to confirm the most shocking revelation of her life. Dr. Chen and Captain Morrison watched in respectful silence as she carefully broke the seal that had remained intact for over 20 years. The envelope contained several pages of her mother's distinctive handwriting, dated just months before Rosalind's death in 1994. The letter began with the formal address Camilla had always known her mother to use when discussing serious matters, but the tone quickly became more intimate and emotional than any correspondence she had ever received from her. "My dearest Camilla," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then circumstances have led you to discover the truth I have carried alone for nearly 50 years. I pray that you will find it in your heart to forgive me for the deception I felt necessary to protect both you and the monarchy I served with such devotion." Camilla paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. The confirmation she had both hoped for and dreaded was beginning to unfold in her mother's own words. "I met your father in October 1946, when I began my service as a lady-in-waiting to Princess Elizabeth. King George VI was struggling terribly with his health and the enormous pressures of rebuilding Britain after the war. He was a kind and gentle man who felt the weight of the crown more heavily than the public ever realized. The letter detailed a relationship that had developed gradually from professional respect to deep personal connection. Rosalind described late evenings when the king would seek her out for conversation, finding comfort in her practical wisdom and gentle demeanor. What began as discussions about state matters evolved into intimate conversations about hopes, fears, and the loneliness that came with royal duty. "I never intended for our relationship to become romantic," Rosalind wrote. But Bertie was so isolated, so burdened by responsibilities that seemed to grow heavier each day. Elizabeth was newly married and focused on her own future, while Margaret was too young to truly understand her father's struggles. I became his confidant, and gradually, something deeper grew between us. Camilla could picture her mother's moral struggle as she read about the conflict between duty and emotion that had ultimately led to the affair. Rosalind had been raised with strong values about marriage and propriety, but she had also been moved by the king's genuine need for companionship during one of the most challenging periods in modern British history. "When I realized I was expecting you, I was terrified," the letter continued, "not just for myself, but for what the scandal might do to the monarchy." Bertie was equally concerned, though he was overjoyed at the thought of having a child with me. "We both knew that acknowledging you as his daughter would cause a constitutional crisis that could destroy everything he had worked to preserve." The letter revealed the careful planning that had gone into concealing Camilla's true parentage. Rosalind had left the palace service and quickly accepted Bruce Shand's proposal of marriage, though she felt terrible about deceiving such a good and honorable man. Major Shand had believed that Camilla was born slightly premature, never suspecting that his wife had been pregnant when they married. "Bruce was a wonderful father to you, and I came to love him deeply for the man he was and for how he embraced you as his own daughter," Rosalind wrote. "I never regretted marrying him, though I carried guilt about the foundation of deception our marriage was built upon." The letter described how King George VI had watched Camilla's childhood from afar, taking discreet interest in her development and education. He had ensured that opportunities came her way, though always in ways that couldn't be traced back to royal influence. Her acceptance into good schools, her introduction to suitable social circles, even some of the family's financial stability during challenging periods, all had been quietly facilitated by her biological father. "Bertie died when you were only 5 years old," Rosalind wrote, "but not before making me promise that I would tell you the truth someday, when you were old enough to understand and when it wouldn't cause harm to the monarchy. I have carried that promise for decades, never finding the right moment or the right words." Camilla felt tears streaming down her face as she read about her mother's decades-long struggle with the secret. Rosalind had watched her daughter grow up, marry, and eventually fall in love with Prince Charles, all while knowing the true nature of the family relationship that would result from such a union. "When you began your relationship with Charles, I was faced with the most difficult decision of my life," the letter continued. "I knew that if I revealed the truth, it would destroy your happiness and potentially damage the monarchy. But I also knew that remaining silent meant allowing you to unknowingly marry your nephew." The letter revealed that Rosalind had actually attempted to discourage Camilla's relationship with Charles in the early years, hoping to prevent the situation from becoming more complicated. When that failed, she had prayed that their relationship would end naturally, sparing everyone the painful truth. "I consulted with several trusted advisors, including a retired royal secretary who had known about my relationship with Bertie," Rosalind wrote. "We agreed that the greater good was served by allowing your relationship with Charles to continue, as long as it remained unofficial and didn't threaten the line of succession." The letter explained how Rosalind had watched with mixed emotions as Camilla's relationship with Charles endured through his marriage to Diana and the subsequent years of scandal and separation. She had hoped that Charles would eventually move on, but as it became clear that his love for Camilla was permanent, she faced the reality that her secret might remain buried forever. "I am an old woman now, and my health is failing," the letter concluded. "I may never have the courage to tell you this truth while I am alive, so I am entrusting it to this letter. If you are reading this, then someone has discovered what I thought was buried forever." The final paragraph contained her mother's heartfelt plea for understanding and forgiveness. "Camilla, you are the daughter of a king, but more importantly, you are a woman of integrity and strength who has earned her place in the world through her own merits. Whatever challenges this revelation brings, I know you will face them with the courage and dignity that have always defined your character. Rosalind's letter ended with a postscript that made Camilla's heart ache. I have loved you every day of your life, regardless of the circumstances of your birth. You have brought joy to 3 fathers, Bertie, who gave you life, Bruce, who raised you with devotion, and now Charles, who loves you despite not knowing the full truth of your connection to his family. As Camilla finished reading, she sat in stunned silence, holding her mother's final words in hands that shook with emotion. The letter had confirmed every detail that Dr. Chen's research had suggested, but it had also provided the human context that made the scientific evidence feel devastatingly real. Captain Morrison and Dr. Chen remained quietly respectful, understanding that they had witnessed something profoundly private and emotional. The Queen Consort had just learned that her entire life had been built on a loving deception, designed to protect both her and the monarchy she now served. The weight of her mother's secret, carried alone for nearly 50 years, now rested on Camilla's shoulders. She faced the same impossible choices that had tormented Rosalind: protect the monarchy by maintaining the deception, or reveal the truth and face the consequences for her marriage, her family, and the institution of the crown itself. The silence in the meeting room stretched for several minutes as Queen Camilla absorbed the full impact of her mother's revelation. She carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the emotional storm raging within her. The scientific evidence and her mother's confession had created an undeniable truth that would change everything. I need time to process this, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. How long do we have before this information might become public through other channels? Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Captain Morrison before answering. Your Majesty, the research was conducted under strict confidentiality agreements, but scientific discoveries of this magnitude have a way of surfacing eventually. Other researchers might stumble upon similar evidence, or someone with access to the archives might piece together the historical clues. Captain Morrison leaned forward, his expression grave. We should also consider that hostile intelligence services or investigative journalists might have access to genetic databases that could reveal the same connections Dr. Chen discovered. The longer we wait to address this situation, the higher the risk of losing control of the narrative. Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where her mother and King George VI had walked together over 70 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now standing in the same palace where her biological father had ruled, making decisions that would affect the same monarchy he had died protecting. What are the legal implications of my marriage to Charles? She asked, turning back to face the 2 people who now shared her devastating secret. From both a constitutional and ecclesiastical perspective, Captain Morrison had consulted with legal experts privately, anticipating this question. Constitutionally, there's no clear precedent for this situation. The marriage was entered into in good faith without knowledge of the blood relationship, which would likely make it legally valid. However, the Church of England's position on marriages between aunts and nephews is more complicated. Dr. Chen added her perspective as someone who had researched similar cases in other royal families throughout history. There have been instances of close blood relationships within royal families that were acknowledged and accepted, particularly in earlier centuries when such marriages were sometimes arranged for political reasons. However, modern sensibilities and legal standards are quite different. Camilla returned to her seat, her mind working through the various scenarios and their potential consequences. What about Charles? When should he be told? That depends on how you want to handle this situation, Morrison replied. If we're going to suppress the information entirely, then perhaps he never needs to know. But if there's any possibility of disclosure, he should be informed privately before anyone else. The thought of telling Charles filled Camilla with dread. Their relationship had survived so many challenges over the years, from public scandal to family disapproval, to the intense scrutiny of their eventual marriage. They had finally reached a place of stability and mutual respect within the royal family. This revelation could shatter everything they had built together. How do you think he would react? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Morrison considered his words carefully. His Majesty is a man of deep principle and strong emotions. The personal impact of learning that his wife is also his aunt would be devastating. but he's also someone who has shown remarkable resilience in the face of personal challenges. His primary concern would likely be protecting you and the monarchy. Dr. Chen had been quietly observing Camilla's emotional state throughout the conversation. Your Majesty, if I may offer a different perspective, this discovery doesn't change who you are or the positive contributions you've made to the royal family and to Britain. Your character, your dedication, and your love for King Charles are exactly the same today as they were this morning. Camilla appreciated the sentiment, but the practical realities were overwhelming. Dr. Chen, I understand what you're trying to say, but this changes everything. Every public appearance, every state function, every family gathering will be colored by this knowledge. And if it becomes public, our entire marriage will be viewed through the lens of this biological relationship. The Queen Consort began pacing again, her mind racing through potential solutions and their consequences. Could we simply destroy all the evidence? Pretend this research never happened? Morrison shook his head. The DNA samples still exist in multiple laboratories, and Dr. Chen's research notes are detailed and comprehensive. Even if we destroyed everything in this room, the scientific evidence could be recreated by anyone with access to the right genetic material. Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. Additionally, Your Majesty, I have a professional and ethical obligation to preserve scientific discoveries, even when they're personally difficult. However, I can ensure that the information remains confidential indefinitely, if that's what you decide. What about a gradual disclosure? Camilla suggested. Perhaps we could reveal the information to the family in stages, starting with Charles and then expanding to include William, Harry, and other key family members. Morrison had considered this approach. That might work initially, but it increases the risk of leaks with each person who learns the truth. Royal family members are often under surveillance by the press, and their conversations aren't always as private as they believe. The conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock on the door. Morrison's assistant entered with an urgent message that the king had called looking for Queen Camilla. Wondering when her meeting would conclude, as they had planned to review preparations for an upcoming state visit together. The reminder of normal royal duties felt surreal in the context of their current discussion. Camilla realized she would have to face Charles within the hour, knowing something that would fundamentally change their relationship while pretending that nothing had changed. I need to make a decision, she said, her voice stronger now as her natural leadership qualities began to assert themselves. I cannot live with this secret indefinitely, and I cannot expect Dr. Chen and Captain Morrison to carry this burden on my behalf. She looked directly at each of them as she continued. I will tell Charles tonight in private. Whatever his reaction, we'll face this situation together as we have faced every other challenge in our relationship. Morrison felt a mixture of relief and concern at her decision. Your Majesty, how much detail will you share with him initially? Everything, Camilla replied without hesitation. The DNA evidence, my mother's letter, all of it. Charles deserves to know the complete truth, and he needs to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with before we can make any decisions about how to proceed. Dr. Chen began gathering her research materials, preparing to leave the evidence in the palace's secure archives. What would you like me to do with the research files? Keep them secure but accessible, Camilla instructed. We may need to review the evidence again or share it with additional family members depending on how Charles reacts. As the meeting concluded, Camilla felt a strange sense of clarity despite the emotional turmoil. The secret that had burdened her mother for 50 years would not burden her for 50 more. Whatever the consequences of revealing the truth, they would be better than living a lie. Walking through the palace corridors toward her meeting with Charles, she carried with her the weight of knowledge that would change both their lives forever. In a few hours, she would transform. From a woman who had unknowingly married her nephew into someone who had consciously chosen to face that truth with courage and honesty. The conversation ahead would be one of the most difficult of her life, but Camilla drew strength from her mother's words about facing challenges with courage and dignity. The time for secrets had ended, and the time for truth, however painful, had begun. King Charles III was reviewing diplomatic correspondence in his private study when Queen Camilla entered, her face pale but composed. He immediately noticed something different about her demeanor, a tension in her shoulders and a guardedness in her eyes that he hadn't seen since their early years together when they were constantly under media scrutiny. My darling, he said, rising from his desk with concern. "You look troubled. How did your meeting with the genealogist go? You've been away for hours." Camilla closed the door carefully behind her, a gesture that immediately alerted Charles to the serious nature of what was to come. In their years together, she had always been direct and open with him. But tonight she seemed to be struggling with how to begin. "Charles, please sit down," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight she carried. "What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, and it will change how you see me, our marriage, and perhaps even yourself." Charles felt a chill of apprehension as he settled back into his chair. Throughout his life, he had received news of family scandals, political crises, and personal betrayals. But something in Camilla's tone suggested this was different, a more personal and more devastating than anything they had faced together. "Dr. Chen's genealogical research has uncovered information about my family, history that contradicts everything I believed about my parentage," Camilla began, choosing her words carefully. "The DNA analysis shows conclusively that Major Bruce Shand was not my biological father." Charles leaned forward, his brow furrowing with confusion rather than alarm. "I don't understand, darling. Are you saying your mother had an affair? That would be unfortunate, but certainly not something that would affect us today." Camilla took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would shatter her husband's world. "Charles, the genetic evidence indicates that my biological father was your grandfather, King George VI. According to the DNA analysis, I am your father's half-sister, which makes me your aunt." The color drained from Charles's face as the implications of her words sank in. He sat in stunned silence for several moments, his mind reeling as he tried to process information that challenged the very foundation of their relationship. "That's impossible," he whispered finally. "There must be some mistake in the testing. These things aren't always reliable." Camilla had anticipated his denial, having experienced the same reaction herself just hours earlier. "I thought the same thing initially. Dr. Chen verified the results through 4 different laboratories. There's also historical evidence supporting the findings, and," she paused, steeling herself for the most difficult part, "my mother left me a letter before she died, confirming everything." Charles stared at her in disbelief. "Your mother knew?" "She knew everything," Camilla replied, producing Rosalind's letter from the envelope she had carried with her. "She carried this secret for 50 years. Watching our relationship develop while knowing the truth about our family connection." Charles took the letter with trembling hands, reading through his grandmother-in-law's confession with growing horror and understanding. The carefully preserved secret that had shaped decades of decisions now lay exposed in his wife's familiar handwriting. When he finished reading, Charles set the letter aside and buried his face in his hands. "Dear God, Camilla, we're aunt and nephew. Our entire marriage, everything we've built together, is still real," Camilla said firmly, moving to kneel beside his chair. "Charles, listen to me. Our love for each other hasn't changed. The years we've spent together, the support we've given each other, the life we've built, none of that was based on a lie." But Charles was struggling with more than just the personal implications. The constitutional questions alone could bring down the monarchy. "If this becomes public knowledge, every decision I've made as king could be questioned. The legitimacy of our marriage, the stability of the institution itself." Camilla had spent the afternoon grappling with the same fears. "We don't have to make any decisions tonight about public disclosure. Right now, only 4 people know the truth. You, me, Captain Morrison, and Dr. Chen." Charles looked up at her with eyes filled with anguish. "But how do we go on from here? How do we attend state functions and family gatherings knowing what we know? How do I look at you and not think about the fact that you're my aunt?" The pain in his voice cut through Camilla's heart. This was the reaction she had most feared, that the revelation would poison their relationship and make it impossible for them to continue as husband and wife. "Because," she said, taking his hands in hers, "I am still the same woman you fell in love with 40 years ago. I am still the person who has stood by your side through every crisis and celebration. The biological relationship we discovered today doesn't change the emotional relationship we chose to build together." Charles pulled his hands away gently, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the same gardens where his grandfather and Camilla's mother had conducted their secret affair. "But it does change things, Camilla. It changes how others will see us, how history will judge us, how we see ourselves. Only if we let it, she replied, though her voice carried less conviction than her words suggested. Charles turned back to face her, his expression a mixture of love and torment. What do you want to do? Do you want to make this public? Do you want to end our marriage? Do you want to find a way to continue as we have been? Camilla realized that this was the moment when their future would be decided. The choices they made in the next few minutes would determine not only their personal happiness, but potentially the future of the British monarchy itself. I want us to make this decision together, she said. I want us to consider all the options and choose the path that serves both our relationship and our duty to the crown. Charles sat back down, his mind beginning to work through the practical implications of their situation. If we reveal the truth publicly, we could present it as a historical curiosity, something that happened generations ago that doesn't affect the current royal family's legitimacy. But that would require ending our marriage, and if we keep it secret? Camilla asked. Then we live with the knowledge forever, always wondering if someone else will discover what we know. We attend family functions where you interact with my children and grandchildren who are actually your great-nieces and great-nephews. We maintain a marriage that could be seen as morally questionable by some standards. Camilla moved closer to her husband, seeing the weight of responsibility that had settled on his shoulders. Charles, there's a third option. We could step back from public life gradually, citing health concerns or a desire for privacy. We could remain married but reduce our official duties. Charles considered this possibility, but quickly recognized its limitations. The press would never accept such a withdrawal without investigation. They would dig until they found the reason, and the truth would come out anyway. The conversation continued late into the evening as they explored every possible scenario and its consequences. Each option carried significant risks and personal costs, but gradually, they began to see a path forward that might preserve both their relationship and the monarchy they had sworn to serve. As midnight approached, Charles took Camilla's hand and looked into her eyes with the same intensity he had shown when proposing to her years earlier. Whatever we decide together. This revelation doesn't change my love for you, even if it complicates everything else in our lives. Camilla felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. The conversation had been as difficult as she had feared, but Charles's fundamental decency and love had remained constant, even in the face of this shocking revelation. 3 months had passed since the devastating revelation, and Queen Camilla found herself standing in the same palace meeting room where her world had changed forever. This time, however, she was not alone in carrying the secret. King Charles stood beside her, their decision finally made after weeks of careful consideration and consultation with their most trusted advisors. The small group assembled before them represented the inner circle who would help manage the most delicate situation. In modern royal history, Captain Morrison stood at attention, while Dr. Chen sat with her research materials, now expanded to include additional historical documentation that supported their findings. Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby had been briefed on the situation, and sat quietly contemplating the theological implications. Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, had been sworn to secrecy and brought in to help navigate the constitutional complexities. Ladies and gentlemen, King Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 months of sleepless nights and difficult conversations. Queen Camilla and I have made our decision regarding the information Dr. Chen uncovered about her parentage. Camilla stepped forward, her composure hard-won through weeks of emotional struggle. We have decided to remain married and continue our duties as king and queen consort. However, we will be making a carefully managed disclosure of the historical circumstances to a select group of senior royals and government officials. The decision had not been easy. They had considered every alternative, from secret annulment to public confession to complete suppression of the information. Ultimately, they had chosen a path that acknowledged the truth while protecting the stability of the monarchy. We cannot live with this secret indefinitely, Charles continued. Too many people already know, and the risk of uncontrolled disclosure grows with time. By sharing the information with key stakeholders in a controlled manner, we can manage the narrative and minimize damage to the institution. Dr. Chen had played a crucial role in their decision by uncovering additional historical context, that helped frame the revelation in a more manageable way. Your Majesties, my continued research has revealed that there were actually rumors about King George VI and Lady Rosalind during their time together at the palace. Several courtiers suspected their relationship went beyond professional duties, but these suspicions were never investigated or documented officially. This discovery had been both troubling and liberating. It suggested that their family secret might not be as shocking to royal historians and constitutional experts as they had initially feared. Archbishop Welby cleared his throat, preparing to address the theological concerns that had kept him awake since being briefed on the situation. Your Majesties, I have consulted extensively with canon law experts and church historians. While the biological relationship you've discovered is unprecedented in modern royal history, the marriage was contracted in good faith without knowledge of the blood relationship. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The Church's position is that the marriage remains valid in the eyes of God, as there was no intent to violate divine law. However, we would recommend a private blessing ceremony to address any spiritual concerns and reaffirm your commitment to each other with full knowledge of your circumstances, sir. Clive Alderton had been working on the constitutional implications with legal experts from across the Commonwealth. From a governmental perspective, the marriage's validity is not in question. The succession remains secure, and there are no legal grounds for challenging their Majesty's position. Captain Morrison presented the security assessment they had commissioned. The greatest risk remains uncontrolled disclosure through external investigation or leak. By proactively sharing the information with key individuals under strict confidentiality agreements, we significantly reduce the risk of damaging public exposure. The plan they had developed was methodical and comprehensive. Prince William would be informed first as heir to the throne, followed by other senior royals including Princess Anne and Prince Edward. The Prime Minister would be briefed confidentially, along with the leaders of major Commonwealth nations. Each disclosure would be accompanied by legal agreements ensuring absolute confidentiality. We expect some shock and concern from family members initially, Camilla acknowledged. But we believe that by presenting the full historical context and demonstrating that we've thought through all the implications, we can maintain family unity and institutional stability. Charles had spent considerable time discussing the situation with his sons privately. William had been stunned but ultimately supportive, recognizing that his father and stepmother had faced an impossible situation with grace and dignity. Harry's reaction had been more complicated, colored by his existing tensions with the royal family, but he had agreed to maintain confidentiality while processing the information. The most important thing, Charles emphasized, is that we move forward with honesty and integrity. Camilla and I love each other deeply, and that love is not diminished by the biological relationship we discovered. We will not allow this revelation to destroy what we have built together or damage the monarchy we have sworn to serve. Dr. Chen had prepared a comprehensive historical report that would be made available to senior officials, providing context for the relationship between King George II and Lady Rosalind. The report painted a picture of two people finding comfort in each other during one of Britain's most challenging periods, while acknowledging the complexities and consequences of their relationship. The meeting concluded with each participant reaffirming their commitment to confidentiality and their roles in managing the situation. As the group dispersed, Camilla felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The secret was no longer hers alone to carry, but the process of controlled disclosure would test relationships and challenge assumptions throughout the royal family. Later that evening, Charles and Camilla sat together in their private sitting room, finally able to discuss their feelings openly after months of careful public appearances while harboring their devastating secret. "Do you regret our decision?" Charles asked, taking her hand as they watched the sunset over the palace gardens. "No," Camilla replied without hesitation. "I regret the circumstances that created this situation, and I regret the pain it has caused you and our family. But I don't regret choosing truth over continued deception, and I don't regret choosing to stay married to the man I love." Charles squeezed her hand gently. "My grandfather would be proud of how you've handled this situation. You've shown the same strength and dignity that he valued in your mother." The irony of his words wasn't lost on either of them, but they had learned to find moments of lightness even in the darkest circumstances. Their marriage had survived public scandal, family tragedy, and intense scrutiny. Now it would survive this ultimate test of their commitment to each other and to the principles they held dear. 6 months later, the secret remained secure within the small circle of trusted individuals who had been briefed on the situation. The royal family had adapted to the knowledge with the same resilience that had carried them through centuries of challenges. Camilla and Charles continued their duties with renewed appreciation for their partnership and their shared commitment to serving the British people. The DNA secret that had threatened to destroy everything they held dear had ultimately strengthened their relationship and deepened their understanding of the complex history that had brought them together. They had chosen love over fear, truth over deception, and unity over division. The secret that began as a potential catastrophe had become a testament to the power of facing the truth with courage and grace.